Hey guys, today I am excited to introduce everyone to a new vocabulary word. It is a scientific term called alexithymia. Alexithymia. It's a word that you need to now adopt into your vocabulary. It is a very important word. So alexithymia basically means a lack of ability to express one's feelings, or maybe what we would call a lack of an emotional vocabulary. Some of my clients actually have a better description and they call it holding everything inside. So that's another way to view alexithymia. And there's a lot of scientific research actually using this theme of alexithymia and relating it to physical illness that we call somatic illness or somatic disease. Specifically, the research that I have done has been about autoimmune disorders, and I want to share a little bit of that. So I found one journal, the Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect, in an article in that in 2021, that actually showed that children with type 1 diabetes were more likely to experience alexithymia, holding everything inside, a lack of an emotional vocabulary, than children who did not have type 1 diabetes. The article concludes, and I'm going to quote here, "These findings are in line with previous studies that show associations between childhood trauma, alexithymia, and autoimmune disorders." So this is not new. This is just some of the latest research. There's a lot of research to this effect. Another study linked greater symptoms of multiple sclerosis in women who experienced alexithymia than women who did not. According to the journal Acta Biomedica Scientifica in 2023, alexithymia is traditionally considered a factor in the development of somatic disease. So again, somatic illness or disease can be autoimmune disorders, but it can also be things like headaches or migraines. It can be chronic pain. It can be vertigo. A lot of digestive issues are believed to be somatic, and I would definitely underscore that. And other things like insomnia or sleeping issues are considered somatic, to name a few. So specifically, going back to the type 1 diabetes and what I learned in reading that article, it actually made me think of a good friend of mine who herself, as a child, experienced pretty extreme abuse by her mother, but she has always kept it inside, even to this day. We're about the same age, and she still really doesn't talk about it, really hasn't expressed her experiences in therapy or with friends, and yet she developed type 1 diabetes at a very tender age of 6 or 7 years old. It also made me think of a former coworker who had a very toxic husband, but she seemed to want to stay in denial of how abusive he was. And while we were working together, she actually was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and it was pretty severe. And yet, that was around the time where he actually did something that really betrayed her, even above and beyond what she was used to. But she wasn't expressing her feelings about it. So I thought of those things. I also thought of me. And if you've listened to me long on this podcast, you might be familiar that I myself struggled with insomnia for about 30 years. And it was very bad at times, to the point where I was hospitalized. And yet when I finally woke up to just how abusive my father really is and always has been, and I felt that anger and I channeled it into an ultimatum that I gave him, and that ultimatum he did not take me up on. So that led to a very strong boundary with him. When I finally did that for myself, that is actually when the insomnia dissipated. And I have since been able to sleep like a baby, and I have been able to discontinue all of my medications. And it's been several years now. I can't tell you how much money I would have paid for that 30 years ago. And I also thought of one of my own clients that I'm so proud of, and she lets me brag about her. She herself had psychosis for many years and was on a lot of medication, and that medication is very severe. And working together in therapy, she was able to allow herself to wake up to just how sick her mother was and feel that anger and channel it out into a very hard and fast boundary. And since that time, which has been almost 2 years now, she has had no more psychosis, and she has been able to discontinue all of her medications. So this is encouraging. So what alexithymia really is, though, I think, if we're going to be honest, is disassociated anger that is stagnating inside of our bodies, making us sick. Some of that anger is at others, and some of it is at ourselves. Those others are very close to us, like our parents or a partner. But some of the anger is at ourselves. And actually, I found in the Journal of Psychological Trauma in 2024, they found in an article that anger at the self was the most linked to prolonged grief disorder and PTSD. And the article concluded, and I'm quoting here, anger toward the self seems to be the most detrimental type of anger. So if that applies to you, I want you to go back to a previous podcast episode of mine called a self-forgiveness exercise. And that was going to help lead you through an exercise to forgive yourself. I would encourage you to do that. But for those of us who maybe have anger at others, maybe we have both, but if we have anger at others, keep listening. And I want to give you some really practical tips for how to channel that out of your bodies so you are healthy and whole. So, of course, we're going to channel that anger into boundaries, assertive speech, and accountability. And before I even say anything more, I also just want to say the word emotion is mostly comprised of the word motion, because that is why, or because emotions like anger want to move us. They want to move us in some way. They want to be channeled out of our bodies into action, like assertiveness, like boundaries, like accountability. And for the purposes of the rest of this podcast episode, I'm going to give you examples of how you can channel it out of your bodies in a fantasy exercise, because those are often needed as well. So the first fantasy exercise that I like to have my clients do is called a fantasy letter. And that is when we just go to town. We write a fantasy letter that is raw and unfiltered to the person that we are angry at. And specifically, we let them know the patterns that we have noticed in them. So, for example, when I wrote my fantasy letter to my father, I said something to the effect of, you invalidate my feelings and you make it all about yours. This is your pattern, and here are some examples. So when we do that, we're able to really document for ourselves what is true, and we're setting the record straight. We're setting the record straight, and that is a very therapeutic thing to do, even just for ourselves. We can have someone hear the letter when we're done, like a good friend, and just validate us. And that is even more healing, is just being validated. However, caveat, do not give someone the honor of hearing your fantasy letter if they're not going to completely validate you. This is not the time for someone to correct you or argue with you or try to talk you out of your feelings. This is the time for a person who just listens and says, that's infuriating. I see why you feel that way. Okay, this is the time for that. So don't throw your pearls before swine and read it to someone who's not going to validate you. Also, we can take that fantasy letter, we can edit it slightly, and we can email it to the person we're actually angry at. If we do that, it is even more therapeutic. I've had clients do that. I had one client in particular who did it finally. And she told me in the next session that after she pressed send on that email, she said, the birds started chirping. I could hear the birds chirping. I could see the blue in the sky all of a sudden. Like everything shifted for her. It is so, so powerful. When we do that, I would encourage you, if you want to do that, let that person know that you're sending it to. Don't even bother replying, because your reply will be deleted and it will not be read. This is a one-way piece of communication. I am just setting the record straight, and that is what you're doing. So another thing that we can do for ourselves is we can do what I call say what is left unsaid. And that is what's stuck in our body. So a lot of times we'll find ourselves ruminating on things. And you know what? I think that's our body telling us, say what is left unsaid, because it's stuck. We're stuck and it's stuck inside of us. So just stop what you're doing. You can look in the mirror if you want, pretend you're talking to the person, and say what you wish you would have said. I know I've shared all this with you guys in previous podcast episodes, but it is worth repeating because it does wonders. And this specifically gives us a sense of closure to express our anger into words, to bring about a type of accountability in words, even in just fantasy. It is powerful. And then the last exercise is what I call say the H word. So this is where we finally say what we were conditioned to never ever say to our bully, even if that bully is a parent, by saying in fantasy out loud, I hate you. So hear me. I have seen more of my clients helped by doing this very, very short, simple exercise than anything else. It is amazing what I have seen. We are not doing this with the intent of fostering hatred. No, we're doing this with the intent of releasing something that's already there, but we haven't really identified with, that we just haven't owned, but it is there, releasing it out of our body because it is poison. Hatred, feelings of hatred trapped inside our bodies are poison. So our objective here is to just release the poison out of us. It's not to hurt anyone else because it is a fantasy exercise. So when we do that in fantasy and we just imagine we're saying to our bully, to our parent, I hate you, it can heal us. It can make all the difference. So those are some ways, in addition to boundaries, to assertive speech and accountability, that we can heal ourselves. And it is the opposite of alexithymia, isn't it? Because alexithymia literally means we're not articulating into words what we feel inside. We are doing the opposite of keeping it all inside, and we can heal ourselves in the process. So when I encourage you guys to do this for yourselves, give it a try. Thanks for listening today. Feel free to share this with a friend. Please subscribe to my podcast if you haven't, and please give me a 5-star review. Thank you so much.